Even though we have not had a lot of high voltage solar kits here at the lab that we would actually recommend to you guys, we do genuinely think that it is the way of the future. In terms of home backup systems, it just makes way too much sense for things not to eventually end up all being high voltage. And after our recent video on the Fox ESS high voltage system, it was pretty clear based on a lot of the comments that a lot of people still don't understand what makes a high voltage system unique, how it works, what it is, and what the main differences are between that and a more traditional 48 volt system. So today we're gonna put them head to head to hopefully help you guys understand the main differences and which one might be best for you. So welcome back to the lab where our opinions cannot be bought. On the surface, a high voltage system looks pretty similar to what we're used to seeing here at the lab, but today we want to give you guys a bit of a deeper dive and actually explain how these components interact with each other and how it's actually a lot different than what most people, including us, are used to seeing. Now, the first system that we have actually had here at the lab that is high voltage and we would actually recommend it, we had a great experience with it in our testing, it performed well, all that stuff, is the Fox ESS system. Now, we've worked with many high voltage systems at this point here at the lab, and honestly, some of them have not worked so badly that there is not even a video of the product because we literally couldn't even get it to do anything. The biggest problem here is that high voltage is a little bit more complicated. So if you get a company like LG making just a battery, it's a lot harder to get that battery to work with another grow-out inverter than a traditional 48 volt system because of how these components work. Now, we did review the Fox ESS a little while ago on the channel, and that is the first system that we actually had a good experience with and we like. And the most comparable system to that in terms of a traditional kit that you guys might be used to seeing would be the EG4 FlexBOSS and GridBOSS. It's very similar to how this Fox stuff works. You have an inverter and a smart hub, and then of course you have your batteries for each system. We could obviously piece together a SolarArc and another brand battery, whatever, but EG4 makes all the parts and components and Fox makes all the parts and components, so it makes sense to kind of compare them together. The Fox is also completely UL listed, so we wanted to make sure we compared it to something else that has UL certifications. But before we dive into 48 or high voltage pretty deep, let's just give you a super quick overview so you guys can get a general quick understanding of what the difference is. Traditionally, home backup kits ran on a 48 volt system. They used 48 volt lithium batteries paralleled together to expand your capacity. These were paired with a 48 volt inverter to power the loads inside of your home. These systems are great. They've what we've been recommending on the channel for years, but they are less efficient. They may have a shorter lifespan, and they have their restrictions when it comes to the proximity of how far away your batteries can actually be from your inverter. And so some new innovation in home backup has led the industry in the way of high voltage systems. The nominal voltages of these systems are typically between 80 and 400 volts, whereas a traditional nominal voltage on a 48 volt system is 51.2 volts. The high voltage stuff is becoming pretty common in industrial and commercial applications, and it is starting to work its way more into the residential space. These systems run their batteries at a much higher voltage, which means you need a much lower amperage, so you get a lot more efficiency gains, installation benefits. It's obviously a bit safer, and it's gonna match up a lot closer to what your house is already running. There's a reason homes run at a higher voltage, so you need smaller, safer wires throughout your entire house. At a higher voltage, you can deliver the same power with less current or less amperage, but these systems are not perfect either. Like we said, we did a whole video on this Fox ESS system, which you can buy through Solar Power Store Canada. They do have distribution in the US. They offer their own service and support, which is pretty good. And a really cool thing with them is they offer 2.5 years of additional warranty on top of Fox's 12.5. So when you buy this Fox ESS system specifically, you actually get a 15-year warranty. Now, there was confusion in our video as well because it's branded as Maple Leaf. Maple Leaf is basically like their in-house brand. It's an extended arm of Solar Power Store Canada. Maple Leaf to Solar Power Store Canada is the same thing that EG4 is to Signature Solar. Now, both the EG4 and Fox systems use smart hubs, which allows you to parallel multiple inverters into there. It gives you smart features like load sheddings and smart ports, and a couple of additional features that you don't get if you just buy the inverter. If you're interested in those things, we have full review videos on the Solar Lab channel about the GridBOSS and the Fox ESS system, so you guys could check out those videos, learn a little bit more about whichever one you're interested in, but we're not really going to cover those smart hubs today. So solar kits, like we've been saying, have been 48 volts for a while now, but even 48 is just an evolution. Most things started with 12 volt batteries. They took the 12 volt systems, they made them into 24 by putting 2 batteries in series. That resulted in you needing thinner wires because you had a higher voltage to move that same amperage. And then again, over time, those two 24 volt batteries come together and you get a 48 volt. But this is kind of where everything has stopped for the last little while, and it's been 48 volts for at least the last 10 years consistently. So with a 48 volt system, batteries are typically available in a server rack style, a wall mount style, or even starting to come in like a stackable style where you just put one battery on top of another, they click together, you're good to go. There's a lot of widespread availability for parts, inverters, batteries, all these components all the way across North America. Now with the 48 volt system, to deliver the same amount of power as you would with a high voltage system, your current is about 4 to 8 times higher to get the same power output. In simple words, because the voltage is lower, like we said, you need a higher amperage to move the same amount of power through your wires. So if you had a 48 volt battery running at 100 amps, you would be getting 4,800 watts. To get that same 4,800 watts from a system running 100 volts, you only need 48 amps. So you basically need half the gauge of wire to get the same amount of power through your system. And now because you need a bigger cable to run a higher amperage, something with the 48 volt systems is that they tend to always have your batteries really close to your inverter so that you don't have a lot of voltage drop in that wire. The longer the distance that power has to travel through a wire, the more the power is gonna drop by the time it gets where it's going. So typically with these 48 volt systems, you have your batteries stacked either underneath or directly beside your inverter so that you have a short length of pretty thick wire running into your system to get the job done. And like we said earlier, it's a lot more DIY friendly to do a 48 volt system. And one of the biggest reasons is that almost all 48 volt inverters are programmed to have a lead acid mode, basically meaning that it doesn't need to read the state of charge or communicate with your battery at all. It will function based off of the voltage, which means you could have a 48 volt inverter, you could have any batteries you want wired together. They could be 12 volts put together to get to 48 volts. They could just be a bunch of lead acid 48 volts. They could be anything. And as long as you have it wired up to your inverter and set it to read voltage, you can basically make it work. Obviously, these are better for off-grid systems, but you'll be able to kind of DIY your own system together, which is something that we'll get into, but doesn't really work with high voltage systems. Also, speaking of DIYers, it's much safer. 60 volts DC is considered the hazardous threshold for shock risk. And so having a 48 volt system means it's a lot safer for basically anybody to go around and wire these things up and learn while you're doing it, essentially, without really putting yourself at risk. Whereas again, with the high voltage systems, you're way past that 60 volt DC threshold. There's more risk of getting shocked or hurting yourself or that kind of thing. Now, the downsides of 48 volt systems is that they're harder to scale to a really, really big system without significant current handling. You'll need really big bus bars, really large gauge cables, and big systems often need multiple paralleled strings of batteries just to make them work. Setting up the batteries in these systems can be a little bit more confusing because they still have tip switches like it's the 80s, where you have to set the protocol and the identity of each battery so that when they're all running and communicating with your inverter, it knows which one is number 1, 2, 3, 4, all that kind of stuff. And you have to set that all up. If you don't do it, it won't work right. So that is a slight downside if you're trying to make your system communicate properly. 48 volt systems, because they're producing more heat, because they have a larger wire gauge and all that stuff, they require fans for cooling, which is a load that does take extra draw. So while you're running your system, you're also running those fans, which is consuming some of your battery. And even at idle, if it's just warm in the room that the inverter's in, if those fans are running, just idling, you're still using electricity even though you're technically not. And that takes us into the efficiency of this stuff. Like we keep saying, putting a lot of power through a bigger wire, you lose efficiency just due to heat losses and stuff like that. But if you think about it, it's very simple. Like your house runs at 120 or 240 volts. All your appliances need 120 volts. So you're taking 48 and using your inverter to turn it into 120. There's obviously going to be losses to be had there. If you have a system that's already running 100 volts to turn it into the 120 that your appliances in your house need, there's going to be a lot less losses there. So that system's going to be a lot more efficient, and you're going to actually get a lot more lifetime out of your batteries. Now, if we take a look at the cost of these systems, the batteries are often a lot cheaper. Over time, as things become more common, it's a tendency for the prices of things to fall. So we would expect high voltage batteries over the next few years to come down in price quite a bit. But right now, a high voltage battery is significantly more expensive than a 48 volt battery. You also have to spend more money on cabling and bus bars and all that stuff to set it up because, like we keep saying, you have a higher gauge wire. So a thicker wire means you're paying for more copper inside of that wire or whatever you're using. You also have to pay for bigger bus bars, and everything to do with your wiring needs to be beefier, which will end up costing you more money. The nice thing with the 48 volt, because it's been around forever, is there's a lot of budget options. So if you're trying to run an off-grid system, say you have it in a cabin or in your garage or whatever, you can buy some non-UL listed batteries that are about half the price. We actually just recently made a video about that. We'll leave a link to it in the description down below if you want to like learn about some non-UL brands that we would recommend. But you can do that and it will save you a ton of money, and you can still afford a really nice inverter so you don't blow up your appliances. Whereas again, the high voltage stuff is so new that all you have is name brand stuff so far. So like we said earlier, with high voltage systems, we've had a few come and go already that we didn't even make videos on because they straight up just wouldn't even work. I'm sure these companies have spent millions and millions of dollars trying to figure this out so far. And so the real question I always had was like, why keep trying? Why keep trying to figure this out if it's clearly not working? But for us, the answer is just gotta be the benefits of using a high voltage system. Starting with the wiring, it's all super small. Smaller gauge cables are easier to work with. They're more affordable. You can make power travel a longer distance because you're using a higher voltage. So you could have your batteries on one side of the garage, your inverter on the other side of the garage, and not have to worry about losses, which makes it a little more customizable. With something like the Fox ESS batteries, there's no wires between them. They just stack on top of each other and transfer power between the little female and male connectors, so you don't even have to pay for wires there. High voltage inverters tend to be a bit cheaper, even though the batteries are still more expensive. The inverters need smaller gauge everything inside of them to work, so inevitably they cost less money, which gives you a cheaper entry point if where you live you could still do net metering. I know a lot of places are kind of phasing that out, but if you could start with no battery system and net meter right now, and then work your way up to a system with batteries, although we would always just recommend starting with batteries right out of the gate. Higher voltage also means you're operating at a lower current, which means it's more efficient at colder temperatures, so you can run these systems in a little bit of a wider temperature range than you would with a 48 volt system without needing the heating. A lot of 48 volt systems require to be heated just to work in cold climates. And these high voltage systems are becoming a lot more popular. In Europe, Fox is already the #1 market share for residential solar, meaning that high voltage is extremely common over there. But even here, all your house is in 120 volts. So to have a high voltage system that's already giving you power at that higher range, it just makes sense. It also handles high power output more naturally. They're a lot more efficient, like the Fox system's entire idle draw is like 25 watts. And inverters are more efficient, and we think they're gonna be a little bit more reliable in the long run. Like we said, 48 volt systems have fans. So usually both sides of an inverter has a little bit of an air hole. You have fans that pass air through to cool it down. High voltage systems just have heat sinks. The heat sinks basically just allow for convection cooling, like the heat sinks take the heat and then distribute it into the air. And because of that, you're pushing less air and debris through your system. You have less moving components, and theoretically it should last a lot longer because of that one simple fact. Our 6000 XP that lives here in the garage, the fans are always covered in crap on the side. Even though they have filters, there's still stuff probably getting through there. And it's then just sitting inside of a bunch of electrical components that over time, if you don't have it in a clean space, probably will wear on some of your parts. It also makes these systems dead silent. Like a high voltage system has no fans, has nothing. You could sit beside the inverter, you wouldn't even know it's on. But I think the biggest confusion point from our video about the Fox ESS was how the output changes depending on your battery setup, because this is not normal for 48 volt batteries. In a 48 volt system, you parallel your batteries, your inverter is none the wiser, it doesn't care, it just gives you the same output. A 6000 watt inverter gives you 6000 watts of output, you're good. If you have a bigger system, say you had like a FlexBOSS, it requires a certain amperage to give you the full output. So if you only had like one server rack battery attached to a FlexBOSS, you're not gonna be able to get your 12,000 watts out of it until you have a battery that has a high enough output. But once you go past that output, everything just stays at the 12,000 watts, you're good to go. For example, one server rack is like 100 amps. So if you had two server racks, that's 200 amps. And then once you hit that 250 amp marker on the FlexBOSS, you're done. Every battery you add just adds capacity and your output remains the same at that 12,000 watts. With the high voltage stuff, it's completely different. As you stack batteries, the nominal voltage increases because high voltage systems put their batteries together in series. So the amperage stays the same, but the voltage increases, and that ultimately dictates the output of your entire system. More batteries means a higher voltage and a higher system output. Basically meaning, yes, with 48 volt, if you have a giant inverter, until you hit the threshold of amperage, you'll be less, and then it'll be the same. With the high voltage stuff, every time you add a battery, your output just changes. Eventually you hit a max, but that is the max capacity that you can do for batteries. So it's not even like you hit your threshold and then every battery you add beyond that, nothing happens. Once you hit that max, you can't even add another battery because your inverter is maxed out. So in our testing, we were saying it was hard to tell you exactly how it performed. In terms of like numbers and results, it did really well. It hit all of our benchmarks, but it's like, did it output the 12,000 watts? Well, no, because we didn't have the right amount of batteries. People weren't understanding that. So every time you take away or add a battery, your high voltage system works at a different load range. So with a 48 volt system, you're trying to buy as many batteries as you need for your own storage capacity requirements, like however many days of backup you want. With a high voltage system, you're literally legally capped by the law in where you are. Like I think in Canada and Europe, it's 5 batteries, and in the States it's 8 or something like that. So once you stack a certain amount of batteries, you're past the voltage allowance or whatever it is for the UL certification. It's literally illegal to keep going. It's a lot more confusing than the 48 volt stuff is. Ultimately, if you're buying a high voltage, you need to make sure you have enough batteries to provide the output that you want from your inverter, not how much storage you actually think you're gonna need. It's kind of the opposite of what we normally teach people to do. And one more thing that we do like about the high voltage system that I kind of hit on a little earlier, but I want to come back to, is the fact that you can run your inverter and your batteries much farther apart. Because your wires are thinner, there's less voltage drop over the distance. You could literally have a battery stack in a closet and then an inverter in your garage and have a good distance of wire running between them, and it's perfectly fine. It's not going to affect the output of your system. When you look at the downsides of a high voltage system, we already kind of hit on a few of them. The battery chemistry and communication and all that stuff is not as DIY friendly. So with these systems, the batteries have to communicate with the inverter for the whole system to work and the inverter to know what's actually going on, because the voltage is always changing and everything is so different. There's a lot of custom communication stuff required as well. It's not just like a 48 volt system where they give you an Ethernet cable, you plug it in on both ends and it works. They actually require you to kind of make your own, pin out your own sometimes cables for these systems, which is annoying. And it's also just less DIY friendly because you can't bring this to a cabin and just piece together whatever batteries you have, plug it in, set it to lead acid mode and let it rip, because it's requiring communication because it doesn't understand how to read voltage, because with these systems, the voltage is always different depending on your batteries. There is no budget options for these yet, and I don't know how the budget options will work because the voltages are always changing and stuff. So the UL requirements, I don't even know if you could do that. I don't even know if you would be able to get a budget battery because you're messing with voltage depending on how many you add. I feel like high voltage systems are going to always require UL listings because they have to be within their legal limit. Otherwise you have a way too high voltage system, blow your shit up. So I don't know that there will be a huge DIY friendly budget market for these systems. I think there's going to be more residential use, installed by an installer and set it and forget it type of stuff. When it comes to the efficiency of the high voltage stuff, we've already hit a ton of these points. You have your smaller wire, higher voltage, lower amperage. It's way more efficient to send power through it. Your inverter does not have fans, so there's more efficiency gained from the inverter not running your fans. But for numbers' sake, the efficiency rating on this Fox ESS system is 97.5%. Whereas the EG4 efficiency rating is about 94%. If you were to run 10 kilowatts through both of those systems and you had a 10 kilowatt hour battery bank on each one, at the end of it, you would have 350 watt hours extra in the Fox ESS system when the EG4 died, basically because it's a little bit less efficient. So it's chewing through that battery a little bit faster. So over a lifetime, you do save a good amount of battery with the efficiency gain from high voltage. There's also just less heating needed for the operation of high voltage batteries. 48 volt batteries often need more thermal management to prevent the cold weather voltage sag that we were talking about, and performance losses as they have to push more current. High voltage systems operate at a lower current draw, which basically means the cells produce less heat waste and the temperature in that battery is staying more stable, which ultimately just reduces the need for battery heating. So it's another area where these batteries are a bit more efficient. When it comes to the cost of the high voltage systems, again, you're gonna be cheaper with the inverter and you're gonna be cheaper with all your wiring because it's a smaller gauge. We've gone over this 100 times. Batteries are more expensive. So overall, it is a good upfront cost, but we do think over time, as more brands enter the market, it becomes a bit more competitive, prices will fall. But I think to make this make sense, we're just gonna give you guys a pricing breakdown, the EG4 FlexBOSS and GridBOSS versus the Fox ESS system. So the setup that we had in our Fox ESS video, you basically have your inverter. This is $1,618. Your master battery is $1,806 and 3 slave batteries at $1,768 each. We also had that bundle that included the smart hub, which was $565. So the total for this entire Fox system that we're talking about today is $9,293 for 15.9 kilowatt hours of total capacity. And now when you take a look at the EG4 system, you have your EG4 FlexBOSS 18, that's paired with the GridBOSS to give you your full system. That package is $5,039. And then we had 3 of the Life Power 4 server rack batteries from EG4. We chose those because each Fox ESS battery is 4 kilowatt hours. These EG4 ones are just over 5, so they get you to the pretty much the same total capacity. And for those batteries, you're $1,471 each, bringing your total for the EG4 system to $9,452. And that gets you just about 15.4 kilowatt hours of total capacity. So it's slightly less than the Fox and it's about $200-ish more expensive. Now that's if you want to build each one battery by battery. Maybe you're starting now and growing with your system. If you just knew what you needed right out of the gate, you could just get the EG4 wall mount batteries. Those are 16 kilowatt hours each. So you could just buy one wall mount battery from EG4 at 16 kilowatt hours, and your total is almost $1,000 cheaper than the Fox system. If you have that same kit with the FlexBOSS and the GridBOSS and one wall mount battery, you're $8,439. We also recommend that if you know what battery capacity you need, server racks are great, but they do cost more. They just make sense if you want to start now and kind of build your system over time. If you're jumping right into it, you can still get it done for a bit less than that Fox system. And keep in mind, with the original bundle, you still need to get a cabinet for all those batteries. So that price is going to actually go up even a bit more. A cabinet to house that many batteries is going to be a couple $100 at least. I think the EG4, they have a 3 cabinet for like $299 or something. Yeah. So your total about $500 more for server racks than the Fox, and you're about $800 less if you get a wall mount than the Fox. So with all of this said, which one of these systems makes the most sense for you? A high voltage system might be for you if your biggest priority is high efficiency and longevity of your system. Not only does this stuff come, specifically the one we talked about today, with a 15-year warranty, but we really think that with the less moving parts and components, it will last longer without any problems. High voltage might make sense if you don't need a battery bank larger than 30 kilowatt hours, because that is where the inverter kind of peaks out. If space is an issue for you, the size of these high voltage systems tend to be a lot more compact. And honestly, if you're not a DIY person, if you just want something plug and play, or you're gonna have an installer come out and do it, high voltage makes complete sense because you don't want to customize it, you just want it to work. A 48 volt system though might make more sense for you if you're looking for a more DIY system with more product availability. You have more budget options, you still have your legal options as well. You're going to be doing a little bit of a safer installation, and it's often cheaper as you keep scaling it because those batteries are going to cost less. So if you're just trying to play around and learn, or if you just enjoy doing things yourself, the 48 volt system still might make way more sense for you. I think really where it makes sense is if you're doing any kind of like non-grid tied install. If you have a cabin, or you have like a trailer, or you're doing this in like a shed or a bunkie, or even like we have parts of our garage in here off grid, if you're trying to do anything off grid, it still probably makes way more sense for you to just grab a 48 volt system and get it done, because you can mix and match products. You can have it not running like perfectly with the lead acid settings and piece together things you may already own. That stuff will all just be a lot easier with this system. So that's where everything is at right now. That doesn't mean that high voltage may not come out with some better options in the future for, you know, more DIYers or budget stuff like that. And it doesn't mean that 48 volt doesn't have something up its sleeve. But right now, in the middle of 2026, this is kind of how this stuff stands. So let us know which one you guys would go with. If you still have any questions or confusion points, I don't know how, because this video feels like it was super long, but leave them in the comments and we'll try to get back to you guys. Otherwise, please make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. Check out the videos on both of these full systems on the Solar Lab main channel. And if all of this still seems really intimidating, we put together a really quick quiz. It gets you in contact with a local solar installer. Take it, it'll help you out. I will catch you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out and stay charged.